Forget everything you think you know about romance, marriage, and even what a bedroom is for. We often picture ancient Greece filled with heroic figures, groundbreaking philosophers, and pristine white marble temples dedicated to the gods. But behind the closed doors of the ancient Greek household, or oikos, lies a world so alien to our own, it might as well be from another planet. Imagine a time when husbands and wives might not even live in the same house, let alone the same room. A world where beds were more for raucous dinner parties than for sleeping, and where marriage was less about love and more about social duty. The private lives of the ancient Greeks were governed by a complex and often bizarre web of social rules, religious obligations, and cultural expectations that shaped every aspect of their existence, especially what happened or didn't happen in the bedroom. From Spartan wedding nights that looked more like a kidnapping to the strange and sometimes lethal rules of attraction and infidelity, we're about to journey back in time. We're pulling back the curtain to reveal the truly bizarre bedroom practices that defined one of history's most influential civilizations. Get ready to have your modern assumptions challenged, because the ancient Greek bedroom was a place of shocking contrasts, where intimacy was public, duty was paramount, and the lines between love, power, and survival were blurred beyond recognition. Imagine a world where your bed wasn't just for a good night's sleep. Instead, it was the centerpiece of a boisterous, men-only social club, a place for political debates, philosophical arguments, and drinking games that went late into the night. Now, picture yourself as a wife in this world. Your role isn't to join the party, but to serve the men lounging on these very beds before retreating to a completely separate part of the house. A space where your husband might rarely venture. This wasn't a strange exception. For many in ancient Greece, this was the norm. The idea of a shared marital bedroom, a private sanctuary for a husband and wife, simply didn't exist in the way we understand it today. Matrimonial double beds were rare, and among the elite, it was common for a husband and wife to sleep in entirely separate rooms or even separate buildings. This physical separation wasn't always about a lack of affection. It was the architectural embodiment of one of ancient Greece's most fundamental social principles, the division of spheres. In the classical Greek world, especially in cities like Athens, society was sharply divided into male and female spheres. The man's world was the polis, the city-state itself. It was all about politics, the marketplace or agora, the gymnasium, and warfare, a public, outward-facing life. The woman's world, on the other hand, was the oikos, the household. Her life was largely confined within the walls of the home, dedicated to managing the estate, raising children, and overseeing the slaves. This division was so ingrained in their culture that it was literally built into the architecture of their homes. A typical upper-class Greek house had a specific area reserved for women, known as the gyneceum. This was often located on the upper floor or at the back of the house, intentionally isolated from the public-facing areas at the front. Here, the wife, her daughters, and their female slaves would spend most of their days, focusing on weaving and managing the household's textiles. The front of the house contained the andron, the men's quarters. This was the most public room where the man of the house, the Kyrios, would entertain his male friends, business associates, and political allies. A respectable woman would never enter the andron when her husband was hosting guests. Doing so would be a catastrophic breach of social decorum, instantly branding her as a prostitute or a woman of low morals. This physical and social segregation meant that a husband and wife in ancient Athens might see very little of each other. He would spend his day in the city, return home in the evening, perhaps to dine with his male friends in the andron, and then retire for the night, often in a chamber separate from his wife's. Their interactions were largely functional, centered around managing the household and the all-important duty of procreation. The purpose of marriage, in the eyes of the Athenian state, wasn't companionship or romantic love. It was to produce legitimate children, to inherit property, and become future citizens. The famous orator, Demosthenes, summed up the prevailing attitude with chilling clarity when he said, "Mistresses we have for pleasure, concubines for the daily care of our persons, but wives to bear us legitimate children and to be faithful guardians of the household." This mindset reveals a world where the bedroom, as a shared intimate space, was fractured. For the man, the center of his social and even intimate life was the andron, surrounded by his male peers. For the woman, the gyneceum was her domain, a place of work and family, but one of seclusion. While we might see this as a lonely and isolating existence, for the ancient Greeks, it was the natural order of things, a social structure designed to maintain honor, protect the legitimacy of bloodlines, and ensure the stability of the state. The lack of a shared marital bed wasn't a sign of a failing marriage. It was a sign of a properly functioning Greek household. But it wasn't just in Athens, where the bedroom was a site of strange customs. In the rigid, militaristic state of Sparta, the very concept of marriage and the wedding night was twisted into a bizarre ritual of secrecy and simulated violence. If Athenian marital life seems distant and formal, Spartan practices were something else entirely. Sparta, the great rival of Athens, was a society obsessed with war, discipline, and the creation of perfect warriors. Every aspect of life, from birth to death, was subservient to the needs of the state, and marriage was no exception. It wasn't a celebration of love, but a state-mandated duty to produce strong Spartan children. And the way they went about it was, to put it mildly, bizarre. Unlike in Athens, where girls could be married as young as 12 or 14, Spartan women were typically married much later, in their late teens or even early 20s. The Spartans believed that physically mature, strong women would produce healthier, more robust offspring, the future soldiers and mothers of soldiers that Sparta depended on for its survival. But the real strangeness began with the wedding ritual itself. There was no grand ceremony, no public feast, no loving exchange of vows. Instead, the Spartan wedding was a ritualized abduction. On the appointed night, the groom, often a soldier still living in the communal military barracks, wouldn't come to claim his bride openly. Instead, with the consent of her family, he would abduct her in a symbolic act of capture. The bride, for her part, underwent a startling transformation. Her hair was shaved down to the scalp. She was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. And then she was left alone in a darkened room, lying on a simple straw mattress on the floor. Under the cover of darkness, her new husband would sneak away from his barracks, moving stealthily through the city as if on a covert military operation. He would find the house where his bride was waiting, enter the dark room, and there, in secret, they would consummate the marriage. He wouldn't stay the night. Before dawn, he had to sneak back to his barracks, rejoining his fellow soldiers, with no one being the wiser about his nocturnal mission. This clandestine routine would continue for months, sometimes even years. The husband and wife would meet only at night, in secret, their relationship hidden from public view. Plutarch, the ancient historian, notes that it was not uncommon for Spartan couples to have several children before they had ever seen each other in the daylight. But why this elaborate ritual of abduction, cross-dressing, and secrecy? Historians believe it served several functions within Spartan society. The symbolic capture reinforced the idea of the groom's dominance and the bride's transition from her father's household to his control. The bride's masculine attire and shaved head might have been intended to make the transition easier for the young Spartan men who had spent their entire lives in the almost exclusively male environment of the military barracks and were more accustomed to the company of other men. The act of sneaking around was also a test of the young soldier's skills. His ability to be stealthy, disciplined, and clever, all valued traits in a Spartan warrior. More than anything, this bizarre practice kept the marital bond secondary to the soldier's primary loyalty, the state and his military unit. By forcing the husband to remain in the barracks until the age of 30, Sparta ensured that his life revolved around his comrades, not his wife. The secrecy of the marriage was designed to keep the passion of the newlyweds at a fever pitch. The Spartans believed that children conceived from these furtive, high-stakes encounters would be more vigorous, passionate, and spirited than children from a more mundane domestic union. In Sparta, the bedroom wasn't a place of comfort or domesticity. It was a secret rendezvous point, another theater of operations in the state's grand project of breeding the perfect warrior class. It was a space defined not by intimacy, but by duty, stealth, and a strange, state-sanctioned form of forbidden desire. Let's return to Athens and the rest of the Greek world, and to that peculiar piece of furniture that defined the male social experience, the kline. When we hear the word bed today, we think of sleep, rest, and privacy. But for an ancient Greek man, the kline was something far more dynamic and central to his life. It was a couch, a bed, and a dining table all rolled into one. And it was the heart of one of ancient Greece's most important social institutions, the Symposium. The word symposium literally means to drink together, but it was so much more than a simple drinking party. It was an exclusive, aristocratic male gathering that took place in the andron, the men's room of a private house. The room was designed specifically for this purpose, with 7 to 15 kleini arranged around the walls. On these couches, the guests, known as symposiasts, would recline, leaning on their left elbow, leaving their right hand free to eat, drink, and gesticulate. Each couch would typically hold 2 men, fostering a sense of camaraderie and intimacy. The symposium was a highly structured affair. It began after the main meal, and a symposiarch, or master of ceremonies, would be chosen. It was his job to decide the strength of the wine for the evening. The Greeks almost never drank their wine neat. They considered it a barbaric custom. Instead, wine was mixed with water in a large central vessel called a crater, and the symposiarch would set the ratio, perhaps 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine, for an evening of serious discussion, or a stronger mix if the night was geared more towards revelry. And what revelry it was! The symposium was the primary stage for Greek social life. It was here that men engaged in witty conversation, debated philosophy, recited poetry, and discussed politics. Plato's famous dialogue, The Symposium, is set during one such party, where Socrates and his friends debate the nature of love. But it wasn't all high-minded intellectualism. The symposium was also a place for games, jokes, gossip, and performances. One popular game was Courtesans, where guests would flick the dregs of their wine from their cups at a target, often with a specific person in mind, as a dedication of their shot. But where were the women? Respectable wives and daughters were absolutely forbidden from attending a symposium. Their presence would have been a source of immense scandal. However, this didn't mean the andron was devoid of women entirely. The entertainment was often provided by professional female musicians, dancers, and, most notably, a special class of courtesans known as hetairai. Unlike common prostitutes or pornai, hetairai were often highly educated, cultured, and witty women, skilled in conversation and the arts. They were the only women allowed to participate in the symposium, offering not just physical intimacy, but also intellectual companionship to the male guests. They were, in a sense, professional companions, filling the role of intellectual partner that a Greek man's secluded wife could not. So, the kline, the Greek bed, was not a private object. It was a semi-public stage for male bonding, intellectual display, political maneuvering, and sexual indulgence. It was a piece of furniture that existed at the intersection of all the things that mattered in a Greek man's life: status, intellect, politics, and pleasure. While his wife might sleep on a simpler version of a kline in the secluded gynoecium, the true center of social and even intimate life for the man is the couch in the dining room, a world away from the domestic sphere. It highlights a fundamental truth about their society. Sex and intimacy were not necessarily confined to marriage, and the most important bonds in a man's life were often forged not with his wife, but with the men he reclined beside at the symposium. In a society with such strictly defined gender roles, and where men had access to a wide variety of sexual partners outside of marriage, what happened when those lines were crossed? What were the rules of fidelity? The ancient Greek laws surrounding adultery, or moikia, reveal a brutal double standard and a worldview obsessed with property, honor, and the purity of the citizen bloodline. First, it's crucial to understand what moikia actually meant to an Athenian. It didn't just refer to a married woman having an affair. The term applied to any consensual sexual act involving a free woman under the legal protection of a male guardian, or kyrios. This meant having sex with another man's wife, his unmarried daughter, his sister, or even his mother was considered moikia. The crime wasn't seen as a sin against love or an emotional betrayal. It was viewed as a profound violation of the man's property and honor. The woman was, in a legal sense, the property of her kyrios, and her sexual purity was essential to guaranteeing the legitimacy of his heirs. For a man, there was virtually no such thing as adultery. A married man could freely engage in sex with slaves, prostitutes, pornai, and courtesans, hetairi, with no social or legal repercussions. His fidelity wasn't a matter of concern. His only restriction was that he could not have an affair with another citizen's protected female relative. The law was entirely one-sided. The consequences for being caught committing moikia were terrifyingly severe. An Athenian law, often attributed to the legendary lawgiver Solon, gave a kyrios the right to kill the adulterer on the spot if he was caught in the act with his wife, daughter, sister, or mother. This was considered justifiable homicide. While it might have been rare in practice, the threat was very real. More commonly, the adulterer might be held for ransom or subjected to a horrifying form of public humiliation. A common punishment, depicted frequently in Greek comedies, was to have radishes pushed up the man's anus, a practice known as raphinadosis, or to have his pubic hair singed off with hot ash. These acts were designed to symbolically feminize and degrade the offender, stripping him of his masculine honor in the most debasing way possible. The woman involved, while not typically facing the immediate threat of death, suffered a form of social death. A husband was legally required to divorce his adulterous wife. If he refused, he risked losing his own citizenship rights. Once divorced, the woman was cast out. She was forbidden from participating in public religious ceremonies and was not allowed to wear any jewelry or fine clothing. If she dared to defy these rules, any man had the right to tear her clothes off and beat her, as long as he didn't kill her. For an unmarried woman discovered by her kyrios to not be a virgin, the law supposedly allowed him to sell her into slavery, though no actual instances of this are known to have occurred. What's perhaps most shocking to modern sensibilities is that in Athenian law, the seduction of a woman, moikia, was considered a far more serious crime than rape. Why? The reasoning was that a rapist violated the woman's body, but a seducer corrupted her mind. A seduced woman was seen as a collaborator in the crime against the household. She had willingly participated in an act that could introduce a non-legitimate child into the family line, thereby threatening the entire structure of inheritance and citizenship. A raped woman, while violated, wasn't seen as a willing participant, and the penalty for her attacker was merely a fine. This chilling logic underscores the Greek obsession with controlling female sexuality, not for the woman's own sake, but for the protection of male property and the integrity of the state. The bedroom, in this context, was not a sanctuary of love, but a potential crime scene where a woman's desire could bring dishonor, ruin, and even death upon her household. Of all the social customs of ancient Greece, none is more controversial or more difficult for the modern world to understand than pederasty. This was a socially acknowledged, and in many places institutionalized, relationship between an adult man, the Erastes, the lover, and an adolescent boy, the Eromenos, the beloved. To us, the very concept is fraught with issues of consent, power imbalance, and abuse. But to the ancient Greeks, particularly among the aristocracy, it was a complex institution that blended mentorship, education, social initiation, and yes, erotic desire. The pederastic relationship was not hidden or shameful. In fact, it was often conducted in the open and was a celebrated theme in art, poetry, and philosophy. It was viewed as a crucial part of an aristocratic boy's education and his transition into manhood. The Erastes, typically a man in his late 20s or 30s, would take on a teenage boy as his protege. He was expected to act as a guide, introducing the boy to the social and political life of the city, training him in military skills and instilling in him the virtues of courage, honor, and self-restraint. In return, the Eromenos offered his beauty, youth, and companionship. However, this relationship was governed by strict, unwritten rules. It was meant to be temporary, lasting only until the boy reached adulthood and grew a beard. At that point, the sexual aspect was expected to cease, and the two would transition into a lifelong friendship. Furthermore, the boy was not supposed to enjoy the sexual act. He was expected to remain passive and dispassionate, yielding to his lover out of gratitude and admiration rather than desire. To show sexual eagerness was considered shameful and womanly. While this practice was widespread, it wasn't without its critics, even in ancient times. Plato, in his later laws, condemned it as unnatural, yet in his earlier works, he idealized the spiritual connection between the older and younger man. It serves as a stark reminder that the ancient Greek concept of love and sexuality was vastly different from our own, categorized not by gender, but by roles of dominance and submission, active and passive. Finally, we cannot talk about the bedroom practices of ancient Greece without talking about the most bizarre and mystical form of sleep of all, incubation. For the ancient Greeks, sleep wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a gateway to the divine. And if you were sick, your bedroom wasn't in your house, it was in a temple. Across the Greek world, there were sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. The most famous was at Epidaurus. Pilgrims would travel for days to reach these holy sites, seeking a cure for ailments that conventional medicine couldn't heal. After a series of purification rituals, fasting, bathing, and offering sacrifices, the patient would enter a special dormitory known as the abaton or enkoimetarion. Was a long, colonnaded hall, open to the air, but protected from the elements. Here, they would lie down on the skins of sacrificed animals, surrounded by hundreds of other hopeful sleepers, and wait for the god to visit them. This practice was called incubation, literally lying in. The goal was to have a holy dream. They believed that during the night, Asclepius himself would appear to them in their sleep. Sometimes the god would perform a phantom surgery in the dream. Other times, he would give them a riddle or a set of instructions, like eat honey or run 3 laps around the temple, which the temple priests would interpret the next morning. But the atmosphere of the Abaton was designed to induce these vivid dreams. It was a place of sensory manipulation. The air was thick with incense. The only sounds were the wind in the trees, the chanting of priests, and the slithering of snakes. Yes, the temples of Asclepius were populated by non-venomous Aesculapian snakes. These sacred serpents were allowed to slither freely among the sleeping pilgrims on the floor. If a snake licked your ear or crawled across your injured limb while you slept, it was considered a direct blessing from the god. Imagine drifting off to sleep on a stone floor, in a sacred corridor filled with strangers, the scent of burning herbs heavy in the air, hoping that a god would visit your dreams, all while sacred snakes moved silently in the darkness around you. It is a far cry from our modern, comfortable, private bedrooms. It was a communal, spiritual, and slightly terrifying experience where the boundaries between waking and sleeping, between the human and the divine, were completely dissolved. From the segregated quarters of the Athenian home to the secret, militaristic trysts of Sparta, from the boisterous, wine-soaked couches of the Symposium to the silent, snake-filled halls of the dream temples, the bedroom in ancient Greece was rarely just a room with a bed. It was a concept that shifted and changed depending on who you were, where you lived, and what you needed. It was a stage for social performance, a site of strict duty, a place of hidden danger, and a portal to the gods. As we curl up in our own private, comfortable beds tonight, perhaps we can be grateful that our sleep is our own, free from the expectations of the state, the eyes of society, and thankfully, free from sacred snakes. Sleep well, and see you in the next video.